morning, afternoon. It is afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I know you're all very familiar with me, but for the audience who may be watching this video in the future, my name is Thomas McLenigan. I'm the Education Outreach Manager over at the Museum of the Aleutians. And this is our first Lunch and Learn in a couple months, but the Lunch and Learn talk is a program that I try to organize at least once a month. It's a presentation by a member of the community. So if you or anyone you know is ever interested in giving a presentation, shoot me an email, education@aleutians.org, let me know, and we can hopefully organize something. But for today, I'm going to be talking about my 2018 Appalachian Trail Thruhike. But before we get into that, we do like to take a moment just to acknowledge that the Museum of the Aleutians and all of our programming is located on the ancestral and unceded traditional territories of the Unangax. And that the museum is supported mostly through the City of Unalaska, and the citizens of the City of Unalaska, to use the proper phrasing. But to hop right on into the presentation, for those who are unfamiliar, the Appalachian Trail is a part of the American Triple Crown of hiking. The other two legs are the PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the CDT, the Continental Divide Trail. So this is the only East Coast leg of the American Triple Crown of hiking. With the other two, the PCT is mostly in California, going up through Washington and Oregon, up to the Canadian border, and then down to Mexico. The CDT is kind of the same thing, Mexico to Canada, only it follows the Continental Divide up through Colorado, Iowa, goes through Yellowstone, and a couple other spots. So for the Appalachian Trail, as you can see, it's roughly 2,200 miles, but that number changes every single year. There are detours, things happen, it needs to change. And most hikers will be doing quite a bit more than the advertised amount. So this is an infographic that I pulled from the Appalachian Trail Conservatory, so the trail is done, when it's done in full, it's called a through hike. You're going all the way through the trail. But many people hike the trail in many different ways. Probably the most popular way to do it is in sections, and then you're a section hiker. So let's say this year I'm going to do North Carolina up through part of Virginia, then the year after that I'll do here to there, and then the year after that I'll kind of do the rest. So most people do divvy out the trail, and they'll only do, like, I can take 2 weeks off of work, I'll take 1 week, go hiking, and the next year hopefully I can do the same thing again. When I did my hike, I was Nobo. Whoops. Nobo is a quaint way of saying northbound. Most people go the northbound route because it is considered to be easier, and the timing typically works out a little bit better than the southbound route. For southbound, obviously, you're starting in Maine and you're going down to Georgia. But we also have yo-yo hikers or flip-flop hikers, where they will start, let's see if I remember. I did not do it, so I don't know. I'm pretty sure you start in Virginia, like early summer, and while Virginia is green, you go south. And then, or you start in the north when the weather's nice. You start halfway, go north, come back to halfway, and then go south. Is basically what it is. Basically, the flip-flop hikers, their goal is to get the best weather for the vast majority of the trail, even if the logistics are harder. So in terms of weather, it works out, but it's pretty rare because of those logistical challenges. Southbounders, because you're starting up on Mount Katahdin in Maine, you're generally starting in midsummer. So as a northbounder, I'm starting in the late winter, early spring, and my goal is to hit Katahdin by the park's closing October 15th or so. Because once that park is closed, no one's allowed inside, and you're going to have to try again next year, right? But actually, let's just go through a couple of these stats. So average of 6 months, about 3 million people visit various parts of the trail every year. There's a lot of day hikers. There's a lot of really nice views that are close to roads, so you just go out. And I'll talk a little bit more about day hikers later in the presentation. But over 3,000 people attempt to through hike. Only a tiny fraction of that actually succeed. And then I always like this stat where the elevation gain loss is the equivalent of doing Everest 16 times because there's a lot of mountains. So just a quick, brief overview of the history of the Appalachian Trail. It was first proposed by Benton McKay in 1921. The Appalachian Trail Conference was established in 25, and then the trail itself was completed in 1937. The first through hike completed was Earl Schaefer in 1948. He was a veteran, and he was dealing with post-war trauma, and this was part of his way of healing, which is actually very much in line with Benton McKay's like grand idea, because his whole thought was, let's give city dwellers, all these folks in urban areas, a place in nature where they can escape. And his grand vision involved like, let's have full camps and like full recreation areas and really turn it into more, almost like a retreat. And then other folks kind of stepped in and like, we need to dial that back and let's just try to get the trail set up right. The first woman to complete the trail as a through hike was 1954 by Mildred Norman. And then the National Trail Systems Act passed in 1968. And that is the law that currently preserves the AT, the PCT, the CDT, and then multiple other trails as well. There's kind of trails all over the country, so lots of hiking opportunities. 2005, ATC changes from conference to conservancy, and that was basically just a rebranding saying, this is our real goal is to preserve the trail as it is. So let's change our name to reflect that. They're kind of the overarching umbrella under which there's clubs and local chapters, local hiking clubs, all these individual people and folks all up and down the trail who are actually doing the daily maintenance. So these guys are kind of the organizers, and they do a lot of the public outreach. But in terms of like the day-to-day maintenance of the trail, making sure the shelters are in good repair, taking care of a lot of things, that's all local clubs, all up and down the trail. The PCT was proposed in 1926 by Catherine Montgomery, inspired by the proposal for the Appalachian Trail. And that trail finished in 1993, and the Continental Divide Trail was established in 1978, but it's still technically incomplete. So that's the most choose your own adventure, because there's multiple routes for pretty much every part of that particular trail. So it's an interesting contrast to like the AT, which is, it changes due to detours and whatever, but by and large, it's very much like set up and kind of good to go. So I started in Georgia. My starting date was February 19th, 2018. I was hiker number 336 when I started. When I finished, I was the 127th northbounder to finish the trail. So you can see my starting and ending dates. Every night, I had a small journal that I wrote in. So what we'll see through, what most of my presentation is like, here's a section of trail, here's a couple of notable entries in my journal, here's a bunch of pictures. And I'll just kind of talk about them as we go through. But if you're interested in looking at all of my unsorted photos, or if you're interested in reading the journal, you're more than welcome to scan a QR code, and it just goes to my Google Drive where I have those things. If you want the AT photos in actual order, you can go to my Facebook. Just go to my albums. I have 1,696 photos that I took during my trip. 50 Facebook posts. Each of them, has 40 to 50 photos attached to them. And you can actually go in Facebook to the feed organization, and it'll show you those in order. Because those are much more organized than all of my photos in the Google Drive, which are all just the numbers, except for the couple in Georgia that I've like GA1, GA2, GA3. So this is me on Katahdin. This is me starting out. I don't know if you can tell, I'm quite a bit skinnier in this photo than that photo. So one of the things that a lot of hikers will talk about is pure caloric intake, because every day on the trail, like what's your daily diet supposed to be? About 2,000 calories. A hiker can very easily, 10,000, 12,000 calories in a day, depending on how much weight you're carrying, how far you're going, the elevation changes, and all of that. But it is a very intense workout over the course of time. So any questions about the beginning or the end before I kind of jump into the actual, let's go section by section? Were you by yourself? Yes. This was a solo hike, but as I'll talk about, you do meet people. So here's my start. I did do the approach trail. So basically, when you go down to Springer Mountain in Georgia, I was very lucky in that my parents were willing to drive me all the way down to Georgia to drop me off and have me start. But Springer Mountain actually has about an 8-mile approach trail, which is fully optional. But that's the reason that over here, I say 9 miles approach trail and then only 0.2 miles on the actual Appalachian trail. Most people will choose to do that approach trail because it's tradition. That being said, there are other ways to access the top of Springer Mountain, and other people will choose other approaches. One of the terms that a lot of people will bandy about when they're talking about this hike or any of the long distance hikes is hike your own hike. I want to be saying that word a lot, hiking. And the core of what hike your own hike means is that at the core of it, hiking is a very individual activity. It's a very individual sport. So there were multiple people and multiple examples of folks who I met who were like, oh yeah, I started this trail with my best friend Jim and this other guy, and we were all going together. And then, a week in, I realized I wanted to do 20 miles a day. He only wanted to do 10 miles a day, and our other friend wanted to do 15 miles a day. So we split up, and now we're all kind of going at our own pace. Because much more than the physical toll is the mental toll. So when you're doing this sort of excursion, it's really, really hard not to get caught up in how large it is and the amount of time that it takes. Because if you're getting frustrated, like, oh, I really want to keep going, but your friend doesn't want to, that'll fray. Because, it's one thing for that to be a day hike, and you're like, okay, I just have to wait at the car for an extra half an hour to an hour when I'm done, and then we'll go home and we'll be done. It's like, okay, over the course of a week, that frustration builds up. So what you'll see is a lot of folks will break into smaller groups. But on the other hand, you realize, oh, I'm going about the same speed as this guy. Why don't we just hike together for a while? And that's where you get what are called tramlies or trail families. And a lot of people, even if they start solo, they will fall in with a trail family. So there's going to be a group who I'll get into their names later on. Because at this point, I didn't know them. I think it was Good Push, Chimney. I know Happy Feet joined them later. Good Effort, I think, was the other guy. But apparently, they started on the same day I did. I didn't know them. I was in a tent, and I think they were in the shelter on that first night. But I met them, I think, about a week later. And they were the one group who I met at the halfway point. And then periodically throughout the entire trail, even finishing on the same day. But of those 5.5 months I was hiking, we only hiked together maybe a week. We just managed to keep running into each other, which is impressive in its own way, because as I'll talk about, I did take a full week off to go to a friend's wedding. So it's very impressive to me that we still managed to match up to that extent. I'll also note one of the things that I was dealing with when I was starting the trail was, one, I was starting a brand new medicine. And then two, I was grad school hunting. Because I graduated from Virginia Tech in 2017. I decided to take a gap year. I worked for 7 months on Nantucket Island. And while I was on Nantucket, it was a question of, do I try to find a spring internship, or do I try to do something with me, just something for myself? And then my girlfriend at the time broke up with me. I'm like, I can hike the trail. So I decided to hike probably November, December, and then I started in February. So it was a pretty quick turnaround from deciding to actually move forward with it and then actually starting. Of course, it helps that I was an Eagle Scout. I had backpacking experience. A lot of people, when they're talking about the trail, will talk about their gear. For me, it was a case of let's pull all of my Eagle stuff out of the closets, see what I have, and then I'll buy what I need. So in terms of new equipment, the only thing I had to buy was a couple of battery packs. I don't talk about this in the journal. I tried to use a solar panel to keep my batteries charged. It was awful, didn't work. Don't even try. My recommendation would just make sure you have enough battery packs that when you go into town once a week, it's enough for each of your legs. Anyway, so my main new gear besides that was just a tent. Like all the sleeping bags I use, I already had. I wore my undershirt from marching band, which I still wear today. If you ever notice me in a white shirt that looks frayed right here, that's because that's where my water bottle hung. And over the course of those 5.5 months, the clip on the water bottle wore away. So now it's like fuzzy. I started with boots. I swapped out of the boots because they're heavy once it started getting a little bit warmer, and then I proceeded to go through about 2 pairs of shoes. If anyone claims they hiked the trail in a single pair of shoes, they are lying. It's too long and too rough for that to happen.
What kind of shoes?
The same kind of shoes I'm currently wearing. They're just trail shoes. So they're not running shoes, they're not tennis shoes, they are trail shoes. So normally that means that the sole, the rubber is a little bit, it has better traction, but it's not overweight like a lot of boots are. So this is the trip that I started wearing hiking shoes, and I've been wearing them ever since. And I'll just, at this point, I'll pick up a new pair from REI whenever I need a new pair of shoes. Let's see, so since we're starting with Georgia, I think I have my first day here, which I'm sure you've probably been reading. In and out today hiking with Chocolate Bear section hiker. Again, a lot of section hikers throughout the trail. 3 climbs right after crossing the border are a heck of a welcome to North Carolina. I crossed the border about a week in. But about halfway through that week, there is a resupply store that's right on the trail. Like you're literally walking right by it, and because it's on a road and you're crossing the road and continuing on. I'm now drawing a blank as to the name of that store, but if you look it up, it's easy to find. But it's about 3 days in, and that is the #1 spot for hikers to drop off the trail. Because after 3 days, it's like, okay, I don't want to do this. I read a book, and I had this really romantic image of what the trail is in my mind, and now I'm doing it, and I hate it. So I'm done. So again, that's the #1 spot where people will give up and they'll finish. Obviously, I made it to North Carolina, so that's kind of the first hurdle. Get through a week. And then this is also my first injury. I was hiking up one of the mountains, and on the way down, my hip started tweaking a little bit, and that slowed me up. I'll mention that just as this is example #1 of how the trail kind of takes a toll on you. And I'll be talking about a couple different injuries as we kind of go through. My first resupply was on March 3rd going into Hiawassee, Georgia. So for the resupply, I got lucky going into town, getting a free ride from a trail minister who had just helped finishing up some trail magic. Trail magic is something that you'll find on the AT more than the other 2 trails, just because the AT is so old and so popular. But basically, it's people going out with a cooler with a bunch of energy drinks and maybe some snacks and saying, hey, you're a through hiker, here, have some food. Some people will just do that. They'll put out a box, here's some snacks, grab one and go. Other people will do a lot. I met one guy who had an entire setup, and throughout hiking season, every weekend, he would just pick a spot on the trail to drive to, and he would have an entire morning buffet, and he would make you an omelet if you walked up to him. Like he had all the propane and everything he needed to cook. So the trail magic, whenever I found it, was very welcome. I didn't find as much as other people do, just because if you remember my start date, I started in February. I was before the bubble. The bubble that we speak of with such ominous terms is basically the most popular starting date. It is the bubble of hikers where you just have like hundreds and hundreds of people all starting the trail pretty much all at once. The bubble starts basically March through the beginning of April, on different days, but that is the most popular time. When I started, I didn't want to deal with that many people, so I started early. That was part of my motivation to start in February rather than waiting for March or April. So what I did as we kind of go into this is in the beginning, I would try to plan out like 2 or 3 weeks. And by the time I hit like week 2, I'm like, this isn't going to work because every day is not going quite as I imagine it going. So I started doing 1 week at a time. And the other benefit of doing 1 week at a time is that you're not thinking about how far you have to go. Because when you're planning out your trip, it can be very overwhelming. So by taking it 1 week at a time, you're able to kind of compartmentalize, like, okay, we're just getting to the next resupply. We're just getting to the next resupply. And it makes it quite a bit easier. So North Carolina to Fontana Dam. Fontana Dam is a big landmark because that's kind of one of the main spots before you hit the Great Smoky Mountains. This section is also pretty much entirely within North Carolina. Here's Fontana Dam right here. This is the, I have it written in my journal, the Nantahala Outdoor Center is in the upper right. This was one of the rougher sections, like the whole border from Georgia into North Carolina in the early days of North Carolina is really, really rough. Once you get to the Great Smoky Mountains, it's actually easier because it's pretty much all following ridges. But Fontana Dam is also entertaining because it's the first road walk of the trail. There is a section of about a half a mile where you're on pavement walking across this dam. And I started with my phone. Can you guess the one spot I managed to drop my phone? On not off the bridge, but onto the pavement. And it caused the full spiderweb crack all over the screen. And that's important to keep in mind later, because I'll talk about that again when I hit Pennsylvania. But this is when I initially broke my phone. I think, oh yes, here. So have you ever gone to a campsite, you set up in the shelter, you get ready, you're cooking dinner, you eat food, and then all of a sudden about 5 dogs come running into the campsite. They have collars, they're very friendly. They're probably hunting dogs who got out or something. But then those dogs decide to spend the night with you, specifically on top of you, when you're in a 0-degree sleeping bag. And periodically through the night, you would see, I would wake up and I would see a head pop up and look out into the woods. And then all the other ones would pop up and look out into the woods. And then I would feel them launch themselves off of me and go barking into the woods. They'd come back, they'd check on me, they'd lick my face to make sure I was okay, and then I'd fall back asleep. So this is probably one of the more notable nights I had in my early days. The only day when I got nice and up close and personal with animals I did not know. The goal was to call the number on the tags, but my service was in and out for pretty much the next 3 days, and by the time I had enough service to try to make a call, that kind of felt like a moot point. Oh, that's right, Kelly Knob is where I tweaked my hip. So that's kind of going in between the two. But you can see that for the most part, there's no plants. Again, this is February, March. Spring has not arrived yet. And for the most part, this was what North Carolina and Georgia was like. That being icy ground, not snow per se. I didn't really get any snow until the Great Smoky Mountains, which is here. As you can see, I lucked out. in Fontana Dam, I was hearing all about how there was a big storm on the horizon and you're all going to get stuck in the Great Smoky Mountains and it's going to be really, really rough. A storm did hit the day before I got there, leaving all this snow. And then the day, I think 2 days after I left the Great Smoky Mountains. So I managed to shoot a gap. Now, the storm that I narrowly avoided was really bad, which I know because there's a guy named Finnegan. His trail name was Finnegan. And by the time he left the Great Smoky Mountains, his name had unfortunately changed to Frostbite Finnegan. So luckily I was able to avoid the worst of it. These are two hikers who I was hiking with periodically for the early part of the trail. He's Bear Meat and she's Clooney. There are a couple from Maine who are hiking home. His name is Bear Meat because he started the trail with some black bear jerky, which was an interesting, interesting choice. So yeah, some more views. This is the observatory at the end of the Great Smoky Mountains. And then this is the view from about halfway through the Great Smoky Mountains. So this is the highest point on the Appalachian Trail right here, this tower. So the Great Smoky Mountains is basically this section right here. It follows the North Carolina-Tennessee border. I think it's probably about half to 3/4 of the state, but it's roughly right there. The Great Smoky Mountains are probably my second favorite part of the trail. My favorite being the whites, which I'll talk about later. Any questions so far? All right, so the remainder of North Carolina, Tennessee. This is at Hot Springs, North Carolina. Hot Springs was the town where I took my longest on-trail break because as I was walking towards town, there was a shelter that was about a mile and a half outside of town. But I met this guy who was doing maintenance on the trail, and he's like, by the way, there's a storm coming. You might want to push into Hot Springs. I'm just like, that's a great idea. I'll do that. And I basically decided to stay 2 days in Hot Springs, North Carolina, because I was letting that storm hit us. And then I was just kind of hanging out because it's a very nice trail town. This is the Great Smoky Mountain Diner, where they have special breakfasts just for thru hikers. So this is their thru hiker special. One of the largest breakfasts I've ever eaten. What were you eating most of the time? So my day-to-day food was pretty much protein and granola bars. So basically how I organize it is I would have 6 bars per day, plus dinner, plus some sort of snack. That snack could be Reese's Cups, it could be peanut M&Ms, it could be jerky. Basically whatever, once a week I'd go into town, I'd resupply, and whatever tickled my fancy I would go ahead and pick up. But I made sure I had at least 6 protein bars a day, all of different flavors, so I wouldn't get too bored of a single flavor. And then for dinner, I would either do ramen, mashed potatoes, or if I was really hungry, I'd do what's called a ramen bomb, or oatmeal. I also did oatmeal, not like 2 packs, but like 6 packs in my cup. Like, if you're unfamiliar, a ramen bomb is where you make ramen, and then instead of draining out the water, the soup, you put the mashed potatoes into that water, and then you mix it up, and you end up with both. And by using different flavors of potatoes and different flavors of ramens, you could get new and exciting combinations. Would I recommend this for a daily diet? Absolutely not. But again, when you're out hiking, you're burning through a lot of calories, so you don't always eat the healthiest. If I were to do the trail again, I would probably have a better diet, but fresh out of college. So here I am at the 300-mile marker. Much of the rest of North Carolina is this sort of mountain. You have what are called balds that become very common. And I think I have a couple more photos of like Big Bald, Little Bald in North Carolina. Two of my favorite sections in that state. All right, so I have noted that I did make my graduate school decision during the stretch. So on the drive down, we did pass through North Carolina, Greensboro, and we were able to take a look at that campus. And I gave them a call during my stay in Hot Springs, North Carolina. And I think it was a night or two after that I made my decision to go there. In Indian Gap, Tennessee, my dad was kind enough to come down and pick me up for a weekend. And during that weekend, I visited George Washington. I did my doctor update to kind of get this new medicine figured out. And it was during this section I decided to not go to George Washington, but to go to UNC Greensboro instead. So, that was a big relief because I was sitting in a shelter, like one of the few shelters that had any sort of service. I'm like, oh, I got an email. Oh, I was accepted. Hooray. So now I have a new deadline because when I started, it was be finished by October when Katahdin closes. Now it's be finished by mid-August when you're starting grad school. Well, I figured that I wouldn't have, it's a time schedule, but I didn't think I'd be slow enough to have to worry about the initial deadline anyway. But now I have like, okay, here's a firm date I need to be finished by. So it was just like I just can't, mess around too much on my hike. Let's see. Oh, yes. So on 4/4/18, so April 4th, today began at 4 o'clock in the morning when I was awoken by the rain. Now, the reason I awoke at 4 o'clock worried by the rain is because that night I had found a nice tent area that was already fully occupied by a bunch of other hikers, and there was no spots for me. However, there was a spot on what was essentially a sandy bank on the bottom of the creek. So, as the rain started and it felt pretty heavy, I suddenly had flashes of, oh my gosh, am I going to be caught in a flood and be washed down the creek? So as I woke up to this heavy rain, it's like, I'm just going to pack up and go. I think it was around dawn, I ended up behind a raccoon. And as I say in my journal, this led to my first pre-dawn hiking, during which I got to follow a random raccoon for about 5 minutes. Both of us just walking down the trail. Basically, the raccoon would walk, and then he would stop, and then I would walk, and I would stop, and he would turn, and he would hiss at me, and I would stay back, and then he would continue, and then I would continue. And eventually, we did hit a creek where he wandered off up the creek, and I was able to continue on. But it was definitely a interesting way to start. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention was this last entry with the dogs. I've mentioned trail names a couple times. Trail name is essentially a nickname that you use on trail. A lot of the shelters that you find have journals and notebooks where various hikers will sign, and they'll leave like small messages for each other and stuff. So it's at the night I was with the dogs, I met a southbound hiker who was finishing his trail, and we were chatting, and he was like, "You don't have a trail name yet?" I'm like, "No, I'm kind of waiting for something to happen." And he's like, "Well, the problem with waiting for a trail name to happen is that normally when it does happen, it's something bad. So it's generally advisable just to pick one for yourself that's not going to be like, oh, you're called trash bin because you grabbed something from the trash. Oh, you're called raccoon because you woke up with, some awful thing." Frostbite Finnegan being a good example of this. It's like, oh, you're wearing Virginia Tech stuff, right? It's like, yeah, like you're the Hokies, right? I'm like, yeah. And it's like, okay, you're Hokey Pokey. I'm just like, great. So from then on, I adopted the trail name Hokey Pokey, and that's what I finished the trail with. So if I were to ever go back and hike the trail again or do another hike and I feel like signing into one of those journals, I would say, Hokey Pokey visited on, whatever day. And those journals are really interesting because as you're going ahead, you can have the thought that the people you left behind can look at this, and people who went ahead of you can see messages left by them. So it's a nice way of, it's kind of the grapevine of the trail, and it's a good way to kind of stay in touch without staying in touch. Like, okay, good, they're still going. Or they'll leave messages like, oh, so-and-so got injured, they had to leave, just so people kind of know. The grapevine is a powerful thing, and you wouldn't think a bunch of hikers would have that much time for talking, but gossip traveled fast. Like, oh, skip this restaurant, someone ate from there and got food poisoning, and like, okay. So this journal entry about starting early in the morning I took at a hostel called Boots Off Hostel. And back in Hot Springs, I met two guys, Play-by-Play and Pit Boss. Pit Boss was Play-by-Play's dad. Play-by-Play was, 12 or 14? Somewhere around there. And we did Hot Springs together, and we finished Virginia together. And actually, while I was going through and double checking some things on the Appalachian Trail Reddit, I actually ran across Pit Boss again. So this talk actually had an unexpected online reunion. So I'm pleased to announce that those two guys who I hiked with for a while, especially at the end of Virginia, they're doing well. Play-by-Play is now a dad, which is also very exciting. Fires were pretty uncommon. I know a lot of people did like a fire every night. I was normally like, I just want to eat, sleep, wake up, continue on. But this was one of the rare occurrences where I show up at a shelter and they've already have a fire going. So obviously I took the opportunity to dry off some of my stuff. And I was talking about the balds. This is really what the balds typically look like. Basically a big open field on the top of a mountain. Great place for kite flying. You know, if you're ever in North Carolina and feel like doing so. But to move on, Southwest Virginia, number 1. Here is the border. Damascus is a really, really famous trail town. They're the place that holds what's Hiker Day, I think is what it is. But this is the section that I was probably the most familiar with already because I went to Virginia Tech. And there's 3 big Virginia Tech hikes that pretty much everyone who goes there does if they have any sort of interest in hiking. And that's McAfee's Knob, the most photographed spot on the Appalachian Trail, Tinker Cliffs, which is this picture, and then Dragon's Tooth, which is this formation right here. So this was a really nice section for me because I'm in home territory essentially, and I'm able to see how those 3 trails are actually connected for the first time, which was really interesting. Now, the stories for this section. When I was finishing Tennessee, about 2 miles from Damascus, we were at an entry road, and I see this pickup truck that just kind of left. And I had no idea if this was a day hiker or someone abandoned their car there, or what the deal was. But I would shortly discover this about 2 miles later when I see this guy with a shotgun over his shoulder, just kind of walking. And we had a very short conversation. He's like, "How far is it to Damascus?" I'm like, "About 2 miles. Did you see my car?" He's like, "Yeah, it's about 2 miles the other way. You're about halfway between, so you can pick either direction, I guess." He's like, "Yeah, sure, thanks, good." I'm like, "Okay, bye." And I'm like, very much on my way. But there's another hiker behind me who's more of an extrovert, and he actually did ask the guy, like, "What are you doing out here?" Apparently, so he had some sort of falling out with his daughter, so he was just out here with his Bible and his shotgun, just figuring things out. It's like, great. That makes me feel wonderful. But my brother was still at Virginia Tech at the time I was doing my hike. So he was able to pick me up off the trail, and it's with him that I really swapped from my winter gear to my summer gear. So losing the boots, losing my 0-degree sleeping bag for a much lighter sleeping bag. So of course, what happens when he puts me back on trail? Well, when I was with my brother, a big storm hit. That storm caused a lot of flooding. This is a bridge, and that should be where the trail is, but instead it's just water. So I was doing a lot of wading that day. And sure enough, I think about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it starts to sleet, and then the sleet turns to snow. And having swapped into my summer gear, sure enough, it drops down to about 20 degrees that night. So it was one of the 2 occasions where my socks were frozen to the point where you could use them as drumsticks. So what do you do in that situation? Well, you force your foot into it, and then you just stomp around and try to use your feet to warm up your socks. But 30 minutes into hiking, we're good again. I was also very thankful to be back in Virginia because apparently Tennessee has a rule that you can't have privies at their shelters. So it's purely shovel based, and a lot of people don't know how to properly bury their business. So I was very happy to be back in a territory with. That's why I have welcome to the correct state, a state with school, home, and privies. Because I was pretty done with Tennessee at this point. I had a couple of days of like, this is awful. Especially I didn't know I was at least partially lactose intolerant until this hike because I stopped that hostel I mentioned. I got a breakfast of cereal with milk, and I was deeply regretting that later in the day. That was my first time learning that about myself. And the fact that I was in Tennessee when this happened just made it worse. I'll put it that way. Yep. Glad to help. South of Virginia, number 2. So Virginia on trail is known pretty much for 2 things. One, it feels endless because about a quarter of the trail is all in Virginia. If you're unfamiliar with the state, Virginia is a triangle, and you're going up the long end of the triangle. It's known for being very rolling, like green rolling hills for the most part. You don't get quite the steep climbs that you get in Georgia or then up in Maine or New Hampshire. And a lot of people fall into what's called the Virginia blues because it's so long, because some people feel that's very tedious. A lot of people will start to have like emotional problems. That being said, once you hit Damascus, if you hit Damascus, you're probably like 75%, barring an accident, going to make it. So at that point, you've been on the trail for quite a while. But for me, Virginia was great because I had my brother at the beginning, my mom's cousin Margaret in Roanoke, also in Southwest Virginia. And then once I get to Northern Virginia, I have my folks and then my aunt and uncle in West Virginia. So this was my family corridor where I was able to get pulled off the trail, and it was very like casual. It was very nice. There was still a lot of flooding from that earlier storm and then from the subsequent rain that we kept getting. I don't know if you can see him. I think he's behind a tree, but I met a very interesting fellow at this shelter whose name I don't remember. But he was helping other hikers get across this flooded, roaring like creek. But he was an interesting fellow because he was out here in a diaper, pigtails, like baby bib, and it's just like, sure, man. I don't understand, but you do you. Again, you meet a lot of interesting people when you're out in the world. So that was probably my most notable interaction. And then this is just Waynesboro is the last town before you hit Shenandoah National Park. And that turned into a whole ordeal because normally you can find a shuttle or a car will stop for you and you can hitchhike into town. In that case, no one was stopping for me, and there weren't very many cars in general. So that was a day where I walked an extra 6 miles into town in order to resupply. So when you're only doing 15 miles a day, that's quite the haul. Luckily, I managed to get into town just in time for the all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet to open, and that was a blessing. But this is a campsite that they put aside for thru hikers. So there wasn't a hostel per se, but they did have this area where you could just go set up a tent. And then if you went to the local YMCA, you could get a shower voucher as a thru hiker, and they would let you take a shower at the YMCA. So that's where I did my planning to get through the Shenandoah National Park. My deadline there is that I had another doctor's appointment, and my mom was going to pick me up on the other end of the park. This is just a ruin on the way into Shenandoah National Park. I included that picture just to show that there is a lot of history of like these small communities of communities that no longer exist that you pass as you're going through the trail. Now, in Shenandoah, it was great. I've been in Shenandoah a lot. What wasn't great is that when I was doing my planning, I managed to think in my head, on this day, I'm going to make 15 to 20 miles. Oh, that was the day I was sleeping in town. I'm now a full day behind where I need to be for my pickup. Uh-oh. So this turns into a sprint through Shenandoah National Park, where I think this was my first 29-mile day. My first 30-mile day took place in here as well, because I was rushing to try to make up time that I had scheduled out of my own plans. This is my first time seeing a bear on trail. That bear made me very nervous because he was clearly ignoring the fact I was there. And when a bear is ignoring you, that's not a good sign. It means that they're very familiar. But Shenandoah has a lot of day hikers, and there's a lot of trash left. So he's probably been acclimated to people. So because of that, I actually pushed on past where I wanted to stop, just because this bear was hanging around. The other bit that was interesting was I managed to leave one of my pullovers. I think it fell off my backpack and I just left it. So this part is me lamenting that I lost this pullover and I messed up my schedule. And then the next day, I went back about half a mile and someone had left it on a pole. So I went back, I got my clothes, and then, had to charge through the rest of Shenandoah National Park. It was a very, very hot hike. The sun was out, spring was on its way. You can start to see a lot more green coming in. And it, if you've ever felt like you're melting, that was pretty much how I felt. Then we get into Northern Virginia, West Virginia. So my parents picked me up, and then, as I mentioned, going through, meeting up with my aunt and uncle past Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry is not the halfway point for the trail. It is the spiritual halfway point, though. So the actual halfway point, once they actually finish everything, is up in Pennsylvania. But most people consider Harper's Ferry to be the halfway point. So these are the groups again. These are the guys who I ran into that I didn't realize I knew from, I did not know that they started on the same day, but we ran into each other. We ran into each other again here in Harper's Ferry, and then, as I said, periodically throughout the rest of the hike. Harper's Ferry is interesting just as it's a very historical town, if you're familiar. John Brown's Revolt, all of that. And then for about 2 miles past Harper's Ferry, you're not on a hiking trail per se. You're actually on the C&O bike trail, the towpath. So it becomes very flat and gravelly and very boring for a while, until it finally makes its way off, and then you're out into the mountains again. The C&O trail is a great trail for biking, which I also did growing up. An awful, awful trail for hiking. It's incredibly dull. But yeah, so there's a couple of journal entries about my aunt getting dinner with breakfast with my uncle. And again, spring's coming in. You can see that a lot better right here, where we actually have all the leaves coming in on the trees as well. Virginia is often called the Green Tunnel. That really only applies in the spring once all that leafy greens come in, because once you hit this point, it's much nicer. This is the C&O Canal, by the way. This is one of the canal locks. And yeah. So then we get into Pennsylvania. I hated Pennsylvania, like sincerely hated Pennsylvania, because it's not necessarily the state's fault, but I started getting depressed. My Virginia blues came in Pennsylvania, and I think that's how I phrased it in the journal, where there's a couple of days where I didn't go as far just because I wasn't kind of feeling it. But part of the reason I hit this down spot is just because it never stopped raining. I was in that state for I think a week and a half, and it never stopped raining. So when I mentioned that I cracked my screen back in Fontana Dam, there was so much water all the time that I think the water got into my screen, and the screen just turned red. And that was it for that phone. So at this point, I have not but a busted phone. But I passed the Mason-Dixon line. This is the halfway point, Boiling Springs, Pennsylvania. That's very early in Pennsylvania, so it's after Boiling Springs that it turned into nothing but rain. The other issue with Pennsylvania is that there's a lot of trails where the entire trail are rocks about yay big. Rocks that are just big enough that you have to pay attention unless you break your ankles, but not so big like this where you're just kind of climbing over them. It's the perfect size rock to not let you get into a good hiking like zone. You can't just kind of zone out and keep going because you're trying to not break your ankles. And that made like 1 mile feel like 3 miles, you know? So that was the other issue with Pennsylvania. This is also a section where you hit a lot of farmland. So there's about a 12-mile stretch where like make sure you top off your water because it's all farmland and you shouldn't be drinking from any of the streams you'll come across because animals and cattle and whatnot. And then, of course, we get up to New Jersey, New York. New Jersey, New York was a very dangerous section in terms of pocketbook and food. Because this is the section by far where there are the most accessible creameries, Dunkin' Donuts, all sorts of little stands and restaurants where you don't have to buy supplies for this section, it feels like. You should, but it feels like you could just go from stop to stop eating whatever's available. But you also had here's one of the large bridges, a fire tower that I stayed on. There's the New Jersey, New York border. This is actually a New York Metro stop. So there is a Appalachian Trail stop for the New York City Metro. So I could have gone into the Big Apple if I had had the time or the inclination to. I think it is a seasonal stop though, so it's not always running. Because I think it's like the second to last stop on that line. What was that? Oh, there you go. There is one section of the trail, I think around just past where this bridge is, where on a nice day you can see the New York City skyline. For me, it was all overcast. So I saw nothing. And then this is a monument in New Jersey, the highest point in New Jersey, if I remember correctly. Connecticut, Massachusetts is another section that I greatly enjoyed. I don't have a whole lot to say about this section just because it was just very nice hiking. It was very chill. I don't know if you've been paying attention to my mileages that I've had. So basically every single one of my journals, I have the total miles and what I did that day. But in the early days, due to the lack of sunlight, you know, building myself up, I started with like 8 to 14 miles per day. And then my stride for most of this hike was 15 to 22 or so. And this is the, you know, through all this entire section, it's like 20 mile, 20 mile, 22, 23, kind of going through. And again, if you want to look at my journal, you're more than welcome to. I can pull up that QR code again. But it's in this section that I hit the 1,500 mile mark. Vermont was interesting because about 100 miles of Vermont is shared with the Vermont Long Trail. So you meet a lot of, so you're familiar? Yeah, so you meet a lot of long trail hikers as well as other through hikers. So here is the sign for the long trail and then a couple of the, or at least one of the fire towers. This one was fun because there's actually a shelter at the bottom and you could stay in the shelter, which I did. And then of course, Main Junction where you make your right turn, the long trail goes left and then you go right and you continue towards Maine. What was really interesting is this is the section of the trail where I stayed with a cult. It was called the Yellow Deli Deli Diner or something like that. But basically, it was a hostel that was by donation, or you could come work on their farm for a day. And I don't know if it was like a cult, but it was definitely cult-y. Um, so that it was a pleasant stay, but it was very weird. um, Rutland, yes, Rutland, Vermont. I think it was the Yellow Deli. Colty? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a cult, but hikers could stay there, so I did. No, like a cult, like CULT. Yeah, so like I might be making my life may have been very different if I had gone worked on their farm. Exactly. Come work on the farm, join us, be with us. So here is New Hampshire in the beginning of the Whites. Actually, I think this is the tower that you can stay at. Yeah, the fire warden's cabin is this tower. Mount Mahoosic, which is one of the first big climbs that you hit in New Hampshire. There's the Vermont-New Hampshire border going in Dartmouth, I think. I got pizza there. It was pretty good. um, and yeah, just kind of more photos. The Whites were my favorite part of the trail. It's also the most expensive part because they have of the national parks, they had the strictest rules because the Whites, it was like a private club basically. But they had these cabins where I think I talk about it a little bit in this section. Yeah, so they have these huts. And basically, if you're a through hiker, you can come to this hut and you can stay and we'll feed you, but you have to do work. And I think I did 2 nights in a hut. The first night I arrived late, so they were already done for the evening. Like, oh, we have space though, so you can have some breakfast. But you'll have to work in the morning. Um, Note: morning work first day is just irritating. So that's basically when I decided if I was going to do this again, it'd have to be evening work, so that way I could just get up and go, like I was so used to at this point. But the huts are like very like fancy. They actually helicopter out like propane for cooking on the stove. Like this, truly like glamping is basically what the huts are. But even like the campsites, you had to pay a fee for, so I wasn't a big fan of that. But Mount Washington was the only mountain on the trail with its own warning, because Mount Washington manages to stick up all by its lonesome in the middle of the Whites. It'll spawn its own weather systems, which makes it incredibly dangerous, and that's why it says, stop, area ahead has the worst weather in America. But at the top of Mount Washington, you have this tram, which I thought I included a pic. Here it is. This tram right here. So get up to the summit, and there's actually a line to take photos with the summit sign. And then you feel like I had to hike up here, and you just took the train, but I have to wait for you to take my picture. So it felt very there's injustice there somewhere. But I was also able to buy a hot dog, and whenever I can buy food on trail, that makes me happy. So, but that section leaving Mount Washington. So this is Washington right here. This is a weather station kind of up at the top, and then on the other side of this ridge is where you have the restaurant and all the other like stuff. But Mount Washington is a part of what's called President's Ridge, because you have the peaks that are named after Washington, Jefferson, I think Adams, and like Lincoln. For now. But it was during this section that I had the worst injury of the trail, where there was a section that was essentially large boulders, and I almost fell in between the boulders, but I managed to catch myself with my hiking stick, or my trekking pole. There's the word. But I fell forward and I lodged it in my ribs, and I think I bruised a rib at this point. So I talk about kind of here like 5 mile a day, 14 mile a day. Like my mileage drops off just because the next day after that injury, I'm like, it hurts to breathe. And I know that there's an inn at the end of this section of trail, so I'm just going to go to that inn. It's $100 a night, but I'll pay that money to just take a break. And I really had to take it easy for the next like 2 weeks because of that injury. So that was my worst injury on trail. I'm very thankful that I managed to catch myself, because if I had fully fallen, it could have been a lot worse. I will say that most of my falls came in Virginia and North Carolina because of snow, slush, and ice. And this was actually already my second pair of trekking poles. My first pair, I fell onto them on the Grayson Highlands in Virginia. I managed to snap one of the poles as I was trying to stand up.
So in your journal on that slide, you said, I hope REI will, on the previous slide, you said, I hope REI will replace them. Did they replace them for you?
No. I don't know if it's just a case where I I don't know if I went through the right process, but it's also the fact that I'm the one who broke it. So it's like it didn't wear out. Like I fell on it and then it. So, but at that point, I just wasn't going to worry about it because the trekking poles you can get a nice enough set for like $30 or $40. It just wasn't worth the effort when I wanted to just keep going. And then we have Maine itself. Going from New Hampshire to Maine, there's a section called Mahoosic Notch. Do I talk about it? Yeah, I can never quite remember where some. Yeah, here it is. 1 mile took me 2.5 hours. It is reputed to be the toughest part of the trail, and I would agree. It's a lot of scrambling over and under, because basically what it is a big valley that's just full of giant boulders. The valley was deep enough that it felt like a refrigerator walking into the valley, because it was so deep that there was still snow from the winter and some of the cracks. And we're currently in July, so that gives you an idea of like just how deep it is. Some more photos. Maine had some of the best views, I would say, just because a lot of these sorts of mountaintops that are very like scrubby, kind of like the Whites, that gave you some really, really nice views. This was interesting. If you see this canoe, that is the canoe to get across this river. It is the only spot on the trail where there is no bridge or anything like that. So you just have to sit there and wait for the volunteer who's running this canoe to canoe back over, pick you up, and then take you across. This is also the where the trail was finished up in Maine. So this is the completion of the Appalachian Trail in 1937 near this spot, et cetera, et cetera. The end of Maine going into Katahdin is also very infamous because it's called the 100 Miles Wilderness. This is the largest section of the trail where there's no resupply. There's no accessible town of kind of any sort. Now, that's a big deal when you're going southbound because you're still new to hiking. You're still kind of working your way up. But at this point, those are like the easiest 4 days of like possibly the trail. Like me going through the 100-mile wilderness was like 24, 27, 28, 29. So I did it in like 3 or 4 days when most people, when you're starting out, it would take you a week or more. And then of course we have Katahdin itself. This is Katahdin as I'm approaching it, and then going up to the top, and then me at the end. And then here is that same group that I mentioned in Harper's Ferry. And here I actually have their names: Good Push, No Excuse, Chimney, and Happy Feet. Happy Feet is this girl right here. She joined that trail family about West Virginia or so, I think. So she joined their group rather late. But yeah, that was my hike in particular. Just kind of going through some of the highlights. Is there any questions or anything you want me to go into a little bit more detail about? I've just kind of been rambling. Yeah. There are a lot of ultralight and lightweight hikers. I chose not, like I kept my pack under 40 pounds. So I would be what's considered a traditional backpacker, where I'm not carrying weights or anything like that, but I'm also not necessarily worried about losing every single ounce. You do see a lot more ultralight people nowadays, but that's not really my personality. You mostly see the ultralights when they're like trying to make up, like they're trying to go really fast, right? So all the ultra marathoners and stuff, they'll almost always be flyweight or ultralight. So my pack, in the wintertime was about 43 pounds. It would go down to about 40, like in between resupplies. Like, as you eat through your pack, it gets lighter and lighter, and you can go further and further. But at some point, you do need to buy more food, right? A 40-pound pack would be totally unacceptable to a lot of those guys. They want to. Was that? Yeah, smaller packs and then different gear. So like I had more than one pair of socks. An ultralight person would not have more than one pair of socks. It'd be, this is your clothes for the entire hike. I carried a 1.5 person tent. So I had a tent large enough to technically have 2 people inside. They wouldn't even carry a proper tent. They would either have a hammock with a rain fly, or they would just rely on the shelters, which is a really bad idea. Or they would do, there's a couple of other systems that are much smaller than a proper tent. So stuff like choices like that, though. So they're trying to optimize at every step to carry as little weight as possible. I have what I currently have, which is basically you have your canister of propane, and it's a thing that you screw onto. What was that? It's not as fancy as a jet boil. It's pretty much just a thing that you screw on, and then it's a spigot that you can control from wherever you set your canister. The jet boils have a different design where they're a little bit bigger, but they're designed to heat up even faster. And they require a specific like can to use them with. So I just had my one bowl and then a spoon for that bowl, and that was pretty much it in terms of my cooking supplies. And then when you're finished, you just kind of use water, you rinse it off best you can, but you're going to be cooking with it the next night anyway. So, my iPod would have been a luxury thing. So now I just have my phone. At this time, I had an iPod Touch and then a separate phone. So as I mentioned, my phone died. So part of the reason my photos are so confused is because once my phone dies, it fully died in Pennsylvania, and then I was picked up by my parents in Connecticut, and then I got my mom's old phone, just swap out the SIM cards. But then that phone entered a never-ending like startup loop, so it also busted. So then I was phoneless again. I finally got a temporary phone in New Hampshire that I ended up using through grad school, which is like a $35 a month, prepaid phone. But the phone drama was this whole thing, because in Connecticut, when my phone was dead, and I was trying to like meet up with my dad, it's like, okay, I need to get to a town, get onto Facebook, like a Facebook message my dad, who, because my phone's like completely out of order. I think that was when my parents were the most stressed, but we had already said we'll meet on this day at this town, so it worked out. But they weren't happy that happened. I would also just say, like, just having a little bit more clothes than other people. Like, I had multiple layers that I could, because some of the ultralight people, I would not be comfortable not having that much clothes, especially for the winter sections. It was like, ultralight is fine, but I also don't want hypothermia. Like, proper wool socks are like, a godsend, even if they're a little bit heavier. Stuff like that, I would say, but you do learn pretty quickly what you can cut down. What are you not using, and just leave it behind.
So other than dogs and raccoons, did you have any other animals?
2 moose. There's the bear in the Shenandoah, a bear I saw at a distance, and there's another bear in New Jersey where I was at a Dunkin' Donuts and I ate like a dozen donuts. Yeah. Well, you're going to work it off anyway, right? But that gas station where the Dunkin' Donuts was, there's a long climb right after it. And I was going up that climb, and I was like, head down, powering up, and I look up, and there's a bear like right there. It was the largest bear I saw on the entire trail. But luckily, this bear wasn't used to people, so he saw me, and he immediately turned around and ran away. But that was my closest encounter with a bear. And then up in Maine, I saw 2 moose. Only at a distance, only like in the woods. So not great views, but
As a true crime aficionado, I know that there's a lot of crime that happens around?
That dude with the shotgun near the Virginia border. But that was it. That was the only time I
And
felt
you
like,
weren't carrying any kind of weapon.
no. Well, I did have a knife. I had a pocket knife. But that was also just, basic survival gear.
And did you encounter a lot of women hiking on their own? I mean, I'm just curious.
There were some. Most had, even if they started alone, they had already found like a group though. So it's kind of a yes and no. There is a fair number of solo hikers who were women, but most of them had found a group that they're kind of joining into. Happy Feet, who I just mentioned, being a good example. I think she started solo, or she started with a different group, and they kind of fell apart, and now she's part of this group. But again, I would say 50 to 75% of hikers seem to join a group. There's not a whole lot of people who will just kind of go off on their own like I will. But again, like play by play, I hiked with for a day and Pit Boss. These guys, there's a couple of days where I hiked like a couple hours here and there. So you do run across other people, and if you find a group you're comfortable with, then it works out. Yeah,
Do another
I want to.
factor here. We could
That is a good question. I don't. I mean, I think it probably depends on where I end up in the future. Like, what's more convenient? What can you kind of work out? Like being able to do a through hike was such a blessing because I was I had worked on Nantucket for 7 months. That internship was both paid for and provided housing. So I was able to save up some money. My parents were still helping with like food bills. It's like whenever I went into a resupply, I didn't have to pay out of pocket. My parents still covered that much at least. I just paid for my own gear, and I had 5.5 months to do it. Right. Um, do I yearn for the trail every once in a while? Yes. Like I got incredibly nostalgic while I was putting this presentation together. Like there's nothing I want more than to go out and do it again. But at the same time, I would like to do the PCT. I would like to do a full Triple Crown at some point. But time and money are just so hard to find. So the answer is yes. I just don't know when I'll be able to again. Yeah.
How is it doing to bring it back to real life? Did you start? It sounds like you started grad school pretty.
So I finished on July 19th. That was very helpful because I started grad school in August. So my deadline was August, but I finished, with about a month to spare. Um, so it's actually pretty funny because my parents drove up to Maine and they actually hiked up half of Katahdin, and I met them coming back down. We were able to go back. Um, on the way back down, we stopped in Salem, Massachusetts, because when my parents first got married, my dad promised my mom that they would stop there, and he blew by that exit because he was driving at night, and he didn't want to turn around. And
He's never heard the end of it.
yes, she has held that grudge up until coming back from Maine, when finally they were able to visit Salem. We were a little disappointed just because it was commercialized to a higher extent than we were kind of hoping it would be. But then in New Jersey, my aunt, uncle, and a bunch of my cousins kidnapped me from my parents. So I never actually made it back to Virginia because they kidnapped me to go to Jersey Beach with them. um, so it turns into a bit of a whirlwind, but I had a couple of weeks at home. And then at that point, like you're focused on grad school. But my personality is also very go with the flow. So it's fairly easy for me to transition from like one step to another just because I'm very like pragmatic in that regard. So I didn't have a lot of issue besides a lot of like nostalgia and like yearning. I yearn for the trails. But that's just kind of have to deal with that as it comes.
Did you have any like really?
I don't get food cravings like it feels like other people do. Like some people are like, man, I would kill for a beer and a burger, and it's like I would like food. So the short answer is no. But I think that's also just part of my personality. Like I feel like I'm very much set up to like I can go off on my own for 2 weeks in the woods. By the way, part of the reason I'm here is because I talked about the AT hike in my cover letter to Jenny and to the museum. And apparently Jenny was like, oh, if he can do 5.5 months in the wilderness, he can probably handle living out on an island in Alaska. So it's actually part of the reason I got hired was this hike. Any other questions? Gear or anything I might have kind of glossed over, or any pictures you'd like me to go back to? Oh, thank you. It's hard for me to talk about because so much of the trail is just like, I just walked for a day, man. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, I saw some views and I just kept walking. That's pretty much what the trail is. Yes, this is Katahdin right here. So, and this is on Katahdin. So this trail is this ridge line right here. Yeah. Oh, this is no excuse. He's the one who took this picture and the picture of me on the sign, and he snuck that one in just for fun. I think the main thing I would do differently is the food. Just because I realized on reflection just how incredibly unhealthy my diet was, where I think I would still do like, 6 protein or granola bars a day, because the main reason I like doing that is I could just keep walking while I'm eating. Oh, actually, no, I also did Pop-Tarts in the morning. So I'd do Pop-Tarts, 6 protein bars, and then dinner. But I think I would do dinner differently, where it would be less ramen and mashed potatoes and more like the freeze-dried food that I currently eat for lunch, like Huel, or other things that are like more like pea protein, a little bit healthier mix of like nutrition. In terms of the hike itself, I as I said at the beginning of the presentation, it's a hike your own hike deal, where it's a case where you kind of have to take it as your own trip day by day. How far am I feeling? I never really pushed myself if I could help it. And I think that is a good thing to do, because a lot of people are like, oh man, I'm falling behind. I really need to make this spot or this spot. And then you push yourself and then you get injured. And then when you're injured, you can't continue on. So a lot of it is like, listen to your own body, like what is healthy for you, what sorts of pain are you feeling? Is this like normal like muscle pain that you get from being very active, or is it something more serious and taking that seriously? Like me choosing to only do 5 miles on a day where I was expecting to do 20. But my ribs were hurting and this could be really bad, so let's just take a day and relax for a little while. So I'm pretty happy with how my hike went off. There's nothing in particular that really stands out as something I would do differently. I would probably wait a little bit longer to change out winter to summer gear, reflecting on that one night that I was freezing cold. But beyond that, yeah.
How would you say that this changed you, and what did you learn about it?
So I actually get this question a lot when I talk about the AT, and for me, it was less about learning something new and kind of reinforcing what I already knew about myself. Part of the reason it's kind of a silly thought, but there's like when I was finishing grad school, there was a sense of like I don't have any achievements that are just mine. Something I can really point to and say, no one, you get help with everything you do in life, but there's nothing I could point to and say like this was all me or this was mostly me. And that's what I talk about a little bit here. I now have an accomplishment helped along by others, but all my own. Where I think it really helped me like feel more secure about like my own life and what I was achieving. Like I did this thing, and that's really cool, and that's all mine. But on the whole, it kind of reinforced like, okay, I am a person who can go off in the woods alone. I'm okay being alone. And I'm a very flexible person. Again, I'm very go with the flow, and I think that really helped on this trail as well. So I think it was more, again, like reinforcing my sense of self and some of the elements of my personality more so than learning something new, if that makes sense. But again, you do get a lot of time to think on your own. a lot of time to explore audiobooks and podcasts and all sorts of things. Actually, if you're curious, oftentimes my days are like, say it's a 12-hour day, it's like 4 hours of silence, 4 hours of audiobook, and like 4 hours of like podcasts and like maybe a couple hours of music. So you gotta mix it up to keep it fresh. And then every resupply, as soon as you have Wi-Fi, you start downloading all the things that you're going to listen to for the next week. I'm sorry, you had another question? No. But being aware of the fact that I didn't train, I was very cognizant of not trying to push myself too hard at the beginning of the trail. Because my thought, like, training is great, but for me, it was a case where I already had backpacking skills because I had done this in Boy Scouts. So I understood the process, I understood what I needed to do. And then in terms of just like the lengths, it's just a case of don't rush, just take your time, let your body build up to doing longer and longer distances. So I would say workups are great, but if you don't work up, just make sure you're pacing yourself appropriately. Because every through hike is just a bunch of section hikes back to back. It is the most attempted through hike, or like most attempted trail in America. The PCT is the second most popular, but I don't think they have nearly as many people as the AT does. There's such a mystique, and plus we don't have any other like long distance trails. Like if you're looking at the PCT, the CDT is not that far away. It's like one state over. While this one is kind of all on its own. Actually, I would love to try to. I thought I wrote it down, but apparently I didn't. I'd love to look at the statistics. I think it's only like 10 to 20% of people who are attempting who actually finish, just because of injuries, bad luck, weather, this, that, the other. But yeah, it's a very popular trail. And I think in terms of like seeing the most through hikers, it's going to be down here before people drop off. And if they're going southbound, up here before people drop off. Yeah. Right. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for joining. I don't know if anybody wants this slide. If you wanted to take a look at the full journal, I can't guarantee it's going to be anything fun or particularly interesting, but you know, there is an entry for every single day. You'll get some more insights into some of the rough periods or whatever. Oh, that's the other thing I might change is just taking a more detailed journal, writing it down a little bit more in terms of like what sorts of conversations that we'd have, like what are some more details about the ridges and things. I'll just finish it with this thought. One of the things I do think about with the trail quite often are all, because you know, you have the big name landmarks in the various states. Like this is like a day hike that a lot of people see. But when you're doing a through hike, it's like, oh, what about all these other views, all these other waterfalls and streams, and all these little spots that are easy to overlook that are also incredible. So that's another thing I like to think about, just like all the lost bits of the trail that are just lost because they're in between points A and B as opposed to being a destination. Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming out. Once again, this is a lunch and learn, so if you have a presentation you would like to give at some point, please let me know. Otherwise, thanks again, and we'll catch y'all later.